Welcome to the 64 Squares studio, where chess history comes to life, one classical battle at a time. Hello everyone, welcome back to Decoding the R.J.Fischer series. And today we are back to USA Junior Championship, and Robert James Fischer is facing Ken Warner. It's still 1955 and Fischer is 12-year-old, as I said. His rating is 1820, his US rating, keep in mind. And okay, Warner Kane is someone who was very strong at that time. He actually finished second in this particular tournament. So let's see how it goes. Fischer is white, Warner is black. Fischer started with e4. Warner played the Sicilian defense, and we quickly transposed to the classical Sicilian. Now, bishop to e2. And the main move here for black is e6 and e5, of course. But this bishop e2 gave Warner a chance to transpose it again to the Dragon Sicilian, and he played g6, which is very interesting that Warner Kane knows about all these transpositions, taking advantage of the fact that white didn't play bishop e3 and played bishop e2, or rather white cannot play bishop e3. Okay, but Fischer played bishop e3 now, bg7, and now the most natural move in this position is castles or maybe f4. You can even play a4, you can even play knight c6. All of these are natural moves and has been tried many times. But in this position, Fischer played a very ambitious move. He played f3, and this just does not sit well with what he is trying to achieve. Now, this bishop on e2 gave away a tempo if you are trying to play for a Yugoslav attack, which is queen d2 and long castle. You rather want this bishop on c4 or back in on f1 because you are saving a tempo. And Warner could have taken advantage of it. He played castle, which is correct. And after queen to d2, of course, at this point, white's best move is to castle as well. But queen to d2 played by Fischer because he wants to play the Yugoslav attack with castles long. But here is the opportunity Warner Kane had in the game. He played pawn to a6, a very weak move. He could have pushed for an initiative by playing pawn to d5. And this is quite a common idea, right? You want to open the center, and there are some ideas of, let's say, e5 followed by d4. So you cannot ignore that pawn on d5. You have to take the pawn, and after knight takes, queen takes. I mean, if you castle here, then rook d8, let's say. Sorry about that weird arrow. Rook d8. And it already feels like black is the one driving the game, right? This bishop is a monster on this diagonal. And I wouldn't say black is better already because white is very solid. White can play pawn to c3, castles, some bishop f2, some, let's say, queen f4 or something. But it does feels like black achieved everything he hoped for. But in our game, all this was not played. a6 was played, and it is a weak move. It's like giving back the favor, right? And now long castle makes a perfect sense because now the attack feels little bit slow than before. Anyways, and actually this position has been reached before, even in 1955. There are a couple of games which I found from 1938 and 1945. So this position was well known, and a novelty in this position was played by Karen Warner, and he played queen to a5. A novelty, as I said. So it was in this position that we have a completely new game, and it's not clear that what the queen on a5 is doing. I mean, it has a very clear plan, but it was better to play knight takes, bishop takes, and let's say bishop to e6 with the idea of keeping these pawns open as a path. The queen alone cannot really infiltrate in the position. Anyways, queen to a5 in our game. King to b1, a good move. You always want this king on b1. And another weak move by Warner. With this queen on a5, it makes sense to take knight takes, bishop takes, and bishop e6, right? Now you're basically attacking this pawn, and your next move will be rook c8 and rook c3. So that gives some play and it makes a lot of sense. That is the main idea. It makes a lot of sense. There is a problem with this particular move order also, which later was pointed out by the Fischer's acquaintance, that there is bishop into f6, a very strong move. Idea is after bishop takes f6, there is knight d5, attacking the queen. And once the queen is exchanged, I will take the bishop first and then I take that. But there is king g7 and the line continues. It is very, standard thing in this particular idea. But okay, we are not gonna go too deep in that position. Rook to d8, a weak move played by Warner again. His idea is clearly d5, but d5 just does not work anytime. Like just g4, and if you play d5, then you have to be wary of knight b3 attacking the queen, pinning the pawn, and stuff like that. So it does not work. And Warner realized it and played knight takes d4. Bishop takes d4 and bishop to e6. Well, a move too late, as they say. Should have played it before. But okay, better be late than never, right? And queen to e3. Of course, if you played the same thing, bishop takes, knight d5, and queen takes d2, knight takes f6, there is king g7. Actually, this line continues with knight h5 check. Yeah, it is crazy. And after takes, you can play rook g1. And still, white keeps some advantage. You don't want to capture this pawn. Actually, you want to play f4 followed by f5 and then h3 to capture the pawn. So that gives white little bit of advantage, very tiny bit. So bishop f6 is not the most ambitious try. Queen e3 on the other hand actually threatens bishop b6, so it makes sense. Okay, you have to stop that bishop b6 idea to knight to d7, makes sense. And okay, you want to play h4, but Fischer played f4. I think this is a very good move because f5 comes with an attack on the bishop, right? So that makes sense. And again, in this position, you can go for a huge counter attack with rook c8 followed by rook c3, but it does not work in this particular position. And Warner played bishop d4 first, queen d4, and an immediate mistake, knight to f6. Here you have to play pawn to b5 just to mate f5 with bishop to c4. I mean, just give up the pawn, at least it opened up the c file and the b file. And white of course would not take that bishop, and white will continue his attack on the king side. But that is the best you have as black. You need to meet f5 with bishop to c4. But Warner played knight to f6. Putting the knight in front of the pawn march is always a bad thing, and it would have cost him quite a lot, basically a game, if Fischer had found the right idea. Fischer first played f5, which is the most natural move, of course. Bishop to d7. And I don't know why, but Fischer played h4. Here, in my particular, I'm not a Fischer, but still pawn to g5 makes a lot of sense. Especially you have the h5 square covered with this bishop. So this knight actually does not have a good square. So let's say knight to e8, that's your only square. And after knight d5, knight takes e7 is coming in. And it is very hard to defend against it, right? Actually, it is just winning straight out for white. And yeah, Fischer missed it. Fischer played h4. Well, returning a favor. And again, here you have to play, let's say, rook c8 and stuff like that. But black played bishop to b5. Now it makes sense on paper because you do want to get rid of this bishop because you want to weaken that pawn, right? But Fischer played bishop to f3. Again, if you want, you can try to pause the video and try to find the winning continuation here, but it is not so simple. It actually has a lot of moves and a lot of depth in it. So yeah, have at it. Okay, so the winning continuation is, well, you first of all, of course, you don't take and open up the a file. That is all quite bad. Secondly, you don't well, if you don't do anything, black's idea is bishop takes, knight takes, and knight takes g4. That take away a very important pawn from white. So white plays pawn to g5. Just remove that pawn away from that particular knight. And okay, of course, black will take bishop takes e2. Otherwise, why would you play this entire line? And idea is if you take knight takes, then after knight h5, somehow this knight creates a blockade on the h file, and your attack is not happening so soon. This is where you have to kick in. Your instincts have to kick in, and you have to sacrifice the exchange with g takes f6. A very strong move. And idea is after bishop takes d1, you play f takes e7 intermezzo. Of course, your bishop will be lost anyway, so bishop c2, king c2, and you let's say play rook d c8. And I can play king b1 also, or I can play pawn to f6. And this pawn, along with this knight which will come to d5, is a huge compensation for the exchange. Anyone at his right mind would have understood that, right? I mean, Fischer would have as well, but he didn't think too much of this g5. He just saw that his opponent idea is to exchange the bishop and take the pawn, so he just played bishop to f3. But it is a weak move. Anyways, rook a to c8. Of course, you want the rook on the open file, and again a very strange idea by Fischer. It makes sense to play g5, even pawn to e5 makes sense, but Fischer played knight takes b5. Now the idea is the rook has been moved away from the a file, but still opening up the a file after a takes b5 is very interesting. I mean, it is very it's very harmful, yeah, for your king. There is an open c file, there is an open a file, and your king side is still not that fast. So that's a very dubious decision by Fischer. Still, according to engines, Fischer still holds the advantage, but objectively, I would say it just feels that black will have some type of counterplay. h5 by Fischer. Again, I don't know. It makes little sense not to play pawn to g5 when you have the bishop on f3. Why would you not? Because after knight d7, you can still play h5. And this knight is clearly misplaced on d7 rather than on f6, right? But Fischer played pawn to h5. And the idea is you just want to open the h file. But still there is no attack even after opening the h file. And black played a good move, rook to c4. Why rook to c4? Well, you want the rook on a8, but you want that d8 rook on a8, not the c8 rook, because you want this rook on the c file. And suddenly black attack is looking quite real. You have to play queen to e3, and there goes rook to a8, another good move. And initiative is shifting to black already. And as a white, I would still already be hoping for a draw at this point. But okay, pawn to a3 played, and instantly when you have the advantage as black, Warner blundered with queen to a4. Now the winning continuation, or rather the best continuation for black, would have been b4. I will show it because it's a lot of fun. Idea is queen to b3. Now you're seemingly attacking the rook. There goes pawn to b5. You have to defend it. And let's say you try to counter attack with pawn to e5, because the knight is hanging, the rook is hanging. It feels like white is already winning, right? Nope. There is beautiful b takes a3. And it is such a nice move, because let's say you take the knight. There goes a takes b2. And now this rook is hanging, that pawn is hanging, everything is hanging. This is threatened, because if the pawn is defended, queen a1 would be checkmate. And queen a1 is a threat anyways. So a crazy line that, I mean, you cannot take the rook, of course, because queen a1, oh sorry, let's say you take the rook, then queen to a1 is a checkmate. So you cannot do that. So it's a crazy line starting with pawn to b4, a good move. But okay, after a3, Warner played queen to a4. idea is if you play pawn to b3, then of course queen takes a3. So you cannot do that. And your c2 pawn is under attack. But it is quite simple to defend the pawn, right? You can just move the queen back. But Fischer played right into the hand of Warner and played pawn to c3, weakening his king further, which is never a good idea. Now queen to c1 makes a lot of sense. Queen defends indirectly the a3 pawn, directly the c2 pawn, keeping an eye on the dark squares, and my threat is still there, right? And white attack is faster now that black attack is halted because of this queen. But after c3, okay, again Warner played knight takes e4, again a bad move. Well, if you want if c3 weakens the b3 square, we all see it, and queen b3 is such a natural move. You are threatening rook into a3, and there is no way white can defend against this. And that's all. I mean, after let's say h takes g6, rook takes a3 came in, and even g takes f7, king takes f7, there is just no attack. Let's say you try to play e5. Let's say it's not a good move, it's actually a horrible blunder. But then after queen a2, king c2 and rook b3, you suddenly realize that if you play, let's say, rook to b1, there goes rook takes c3, and you are getting checkmated very soon. So that is just winning. Queen to b3. Of course, c3 weakens the b3. But somehow after c3, Warner played, well, knight takes e4. It's a pawn, but are you actually pawn hunting at this point? Your king is under fire. Your opponent king is also under fire. And here, this is just bad because here white could have continued with h takes g. But Fischer returned the favor by playing bishop takes e4, and this is a terrible blunder. Now, idea is, of course, black will take rook takes e4, and you have to move the queen. And Fischer thought that he had queen to h6 with the idea of hg, and mate. And in this position, there is only one move for black which wins. So pause the video and try to find the winning continuation for black while I give you a couple of seconds. Okay. Well, it is not hard to find. It's rook to e2 with the very direct threat of queen c2 check and queen b2 mate. And once you realize that this also frees up the e4 square, there goes rook d2 played by Fischer. Again, you have to play queen to c1 and the game continues. But rook to d2 is another blunder when after rook takes, queen takes. Here Warner played a move and Fischer resigned. If you want to find this, it's quite a simple tactics. So just give it a couple of seconds. If you still see it, yeah, it's queen to e4. Check, forks the rook, and it was in this position at move number 28 that Robert James Fischer resigned the game. I mean, you are just losing a rook at this point, and your attack is non-existent. Your king is the one under attack. And what a game it was. I mean, it shows that Fischer is still struggling in his early age with the attack and unorthodox lines. And yeah, I mean, that will mark his journey to improve himself. So let's see how he's going to improve in the next tournament. If you like this video, then give it a thumbs up, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.